Welcome to the Lead with Hope podcast. I'm your host, Brandy Kelly. This is the podcast where you will learn about self-reflection, self-awareness, and how to lead with hope through adversity. I love connecting with others and hearing their stories, and trust that these stories will help in your personal and professional growth. Hit subscribe and share your favorite episode with a colleague. Now, let's tune into the next episode. Today, my guest is LaVonna Roth, Chief Illuminator of Ignite Your Shine. She leads a company committed to a human-focused culture. LaVonna integrates brain science principles into her shine. As the creator of Ignite Your Shine, she's more than a speaker and consultant. She's a collaborator in transforming leadership, helping individuals navigate challenges and step into their greatness. Welcome to the Lead with Hope podcast, LaVonna.
Thank you for having me, Brandy, and thank you for what you do.
As I did a little bit of social media stalking to prepare for our interview today, I'm always intrigued to see where my guests started their career and how they progress into their current realities. And so I guess that's where we are going to start today. So if you would, just tell us a little bit about who you are and what led you to start your own business.
So I am a keynote speaker, but originally started out as an educator. I was a teacher for 10 years, and I have a degree in educational leadership that I had full intention of using, but I still do. I'll put it that way, just in a different way than planned. And I had an opportunity, though, to step out. And I am a mom, and that stepping out came at a time where I was a single parent and needed some additional revenue in order to support myself and my daughter. And so I had this opportunity and I took it and I enjoyed it. But what I found was that I was too far removed from teachers and students at the time. And it bothered me. And so that led to multiple other opportunities that in hindsight, now I can see how all of it has led into what I do as a business owner now. But at the time, just didn't really understand the path and what all was happening, except that I was enjoying it. And then, okay, I'm too far removed. I like this. I'm too far removed. And so I ended up working for a company that was a really cool startup. But unfortunately, a month and a half into it, they laid off a bunch of people. And then 3 months later, I was laid off as well. And they don't exist anymore. So that gave me one lesson. And then the next lesson came when I worked for a company that was very highly toxic. I was screamed at, cussed out 1 minute. And then the next minute, they were hugging me and saying, God put you in your life for a reason. We're so blessed to have you. And I thought, I found out I was the 8th person in 10 months in that position.
Oh, wow.
And I came home to my husband. I came home to my husband one day and I said, if they can run a company and treat people like that, then I can run a company and treat people right. And Brandy had no idea what that meant at the time, but I jumped, and that was back in 2008. So here we are.
Wow. That's an inspirational story. And, this morning on my morning walk, I was listening to At the Table with Patrick Lencioni. And he was talking about culture and the impact that culture has on individuals, on an organization, and when to know when you should jump, when you should get out of that organization, because it's just not a good fit. And there's a lot of different reasons that you may or may not be a good fit in an organization. But in your work, Ignite Your Shine, you're working on culture, right?
Yes. And it is pretty. Go ahead.
Well, when you're talking about that human-focused culture and working on that, can you kind of dive into that a little bit more and tell us, how do you work with, and I'm assuming you work with schools and businesses to help them ignite their shine. How do you go about doing that? How do you use that framework with organizations?
Yeah. So it's interesting, when you look at companies and then schools. And it's interesting because both have what would be called an ROI, return on investment. So with schools, we're looking at accountability of test scores and such, and they feel the heat from especially their communities and their board of education members and even state that you've got to perform at a certain level. Well, businesses, companies are the same way, just it tends to look more like dollars or the number of sales that they have with product and such. So the challenge with it is when we can get very focused on numbers. So that's what it all comes down to, is focus on numbers, is that we can forget about the people who actually help to create those numbers. And so just from experiences of over the past years working with businesses and schools, that I've seen that sometimes we can lose our vision and lose our way. And it's understandable. It really is, because I often say that it's hard as an educator to sometimes talk about money. And so when I went to business and I work with others who are looking at how do I get into consulting, one of the things I talk about is that none of us really love to talk about money, especially if we are mission driven. However, the best advice that I was ever told was, if you don't have money, you don't have a business. And if you don't have a business, you can't make an impact.
Mhm.
And that has driven me to like completely shift my mindset. So I love that on your walk, you were listening to something that was just, it's that different perspective and thought. But that toxic culture is what happens when, especially when we lose sight of who we're serving and why we're serving them, and then getting into the how. And that's where the SHINE framework comes into play. Is we, for example, in SHINE, the letter S stands for self. And what we focus on is not only the whole person, but we also really hone in on what are the strengths, gifts, skills, and talents of that person. And so for this, it's very personal and it's professional. And so when we talk directly to people, and like I say, I'm keynoting, or if I'm working with small groups, I'm talking directly to the person as a personal approach, because sometimes we forget what we're good at doing because of how culture and life has thrown us curveballs and such. So how do we focus on what are those strengths, gifts, skills, and talents? And once an individual begins to step into that and realize, okay, I don't have to be great at everything because I'm not going to be great at everything, but here's what I do bring to the table. And that's where the conversation shifts also into the human focused culture, is because now as a team or as a school or as an organization, we have these conversations about who is good at what, who has what on their plate. But then that also leads us into H and SHINE, which is heart, and that's about passion. Because if I may be good at something, but I don't have a passion for it, it is going to drain me over time and I'm going to lose motivation. It is just the reality of human nature.
Yes.
But if I'm sitting beside somebody else who also has the same strength, but they also have the passion, could they possibly take that task because they love doing it? So could they take it off of my plate? And I can step in and support, of course, but maybe it's not fully on my plate as a responsibility or as a job because they actually love it. Let's give them it to them. So it just opens up this whole dialogue and this shifts the focus.
Yeah. That sounds like a powerful framework, because you are plugging people in to where they're purposed and they're passionate about that work. And so often, especially, in my circle of education, that's where I live my life. What I see is people are doing things just because nobody else will do them. They need to be done and nobody else will do them. So they're just getting it done. They're getting the job done and they're adding more and more to their plate. And the same people are doing most everything, sometimes in organizations. So with your Ignite Your Shine framework, I mean, how do you combat those kinds of issues?
So it helps to slow down the people who are people pleasers, first of all, who will say yes to everything. It also shifts the thinking of, if I am an administrator, I'm going to ask somebody to do something because I know they always say yes. I know it will get done very well because it always does. I know it will get done. And we ask the same people and we burn those people out. And yes, maybe that person can do it. For example, I have a teammate on my team that I could ask her to do anything. And if she doesn't know how to do it, she will research it, figure it out, and do it at a maximal level. Like, she's phenomenal. But it doesn't mean she's the right person to do it. And so I think if we're more aware of who are the strengths, gifts, skills, and talents of people and who has the passions for it, and we begin to say, hey, wait a minute, they're good at this and they love this. Let me go ask them. Imagine what that also does for that person. Like, I remember working with a group of teachers that happened to be kindergarten teachers at the time. And we were talking about what we're good at doing, what we're not good at doing. And one of the teachers said, LaVonna, you want me to go to a teammate and say, I'm not really good at this. Could you help me? She said, do you know how that makes me look? I said, I totally understand that. I totally get that. But let's try flipping the script. I turned to her teammate and I said, if she were to come to you and say, I'm not good at doing this, could you help me because you are? How would you feel? And she said, oh my goodness, I'd feel amazing. Like, I would love to help. Like, yeah, that would make me feel so good. And I said, yes. And I said, but see, we always come from our own lens of how does it make me look, not what might it do for somebody else. So one of the biggest things I feel in a human focused culture is administrators have to have an awareness of what are they good at doing and what are their passions. And sometimes there's nobody. And the
Mhm.
reality is we have to do things that we
Right.
don't always want to do. So that's where that 80/20 rule comes in. Like we look at our teammates when working with schools or businesses, are 80% of your people doing what they really enjoy doing? And then there's going to be the 20% of the tasks that they don't love.
Mhm.
These conversations, the goal, Brandy, is to switch that lens into really looking at who do we have before us? And then how do I handle and lead in that way that I support who is in my building?
Yeah. And if you are focusing on the things that your people are good at, if that is your intention, you have to get to know your people. And if you know your people, you know what their strengths are, you know what drives them and what they're passionate about. Just that relationship piece, you're going to build that, and by virtue, you're going to build trust in the organization. And I think just simply building that trust is going to be a powerful piece to moving the metrics, improving student achievement, because you're focusing on the relationships and that human focused culture. So that is so incredibly powerful. I love that. I love that human focused culture. I love Ignite Your Shine. So thank you for sharing that with us. Now, with the Lead with Hope system, that is a system of self efficacy. So this kind of goes hand in hand. The system of self efficacy, H stands for habits, O for optimistic outlook, P for passion, purpose, and perseverance, and E stands for excellence. So, with the Lead with Hope framework, what resonates most with you and why?
All of it. So anything that can add positivity and remind us that we have a greatness within us,
Mhm.
and to create hope. Hope is extremely powerful. It's, to me, the core of, if we lose hope, we pretty much lose our ambition for life. And so I applaud you on pulling this together. The O and optimism definitely stood out to me because I am a more optimistic person. And it does not mean that I don't have my moments of what is happening? Why is this happening? I don't know if I want to continue doing this or,
Mhm.
and can go down that path. But then I have to like have my little me moment and
Mhm.
then say, okay, yes, you had your me moment. And yes, you don't love this right now, but what can you control in this moment? What can you do from this? And so that's where, to me, that having that optimism is huge. And then I know you said what's most, but your P aligns so much with the passion and the purpose.
Yeah.
And then you said E, the excellence. Our E is exceptional. And
Okay.
it's because it's reminding you to be the exceptional person that you were meant to be, not anybody else.
Yeah.
So just so much alignment. And it's just, I don't believe that there can ever be too much goodness out in the world, especially with what we often see and combat. And so I welcome this alignment.
Yeah. And I think, with your Ignite Your Shine and my Lead with Hope, for me anyway, it's kind of been born out of adversity. It's been born out of my own personal experiences. And then, you take your lived experiences and then you try to make a difference in this world. You go out and you try to fulfill your purpose with passion. And unfortunately, adversity isn't a one and done proposition. We consistently butt up against obstacles. And if we don't deal with our baggage, if we don't deal with the adversity we face and heal from it, we're constantly dragging it behind us. And so, with that adversity piece, I'm wondering, have you had adversity in your life? And if so, how has that shaped your trajectory in your career?
Oh, so much adversity. People sometimes listen and they're like, "Holy cow, you could have a movie made about you." And I'm like, "Yeah, no desire for that." But it is fascinating, and adversity has definitely shaped. I've been a part in my life where I don't know my biological father, and I have learned, for example, that I will never meet him because the only time I've ever seen a picture of him was about probably closer to 3 years now, and it was his picture of his obituary.
Mm,
And so just I was a little girl who really thought he didn't want me, and
mhm.
that's the story that I created.
Yeah.
And what I've learned a lot since then and along the way is how many times we do create stories around adversity.
Mhm.
But what I've really learned is we have a choice on what we believe and what we choose that story to be.
Mhm.
So I could share a ton of adversity. This is one tiny piece, but what I can say is that in that case, for example, for years and years and years, like even when I was a little girl, apparently I used to go to parties and go up to men and say, "Are you my dad?"
Mhm.
And I don't have any recollection of this, but I have been told this by a relative. And so that's an example of how much it really did affect me back then. To I know how it affected me once I got into my teen years and once even as a young adult. And because the interesting part of that too is I don't even know my biological history, things that come into play. So I created this whole story though that I wasn't good enough. Like when we bury down to the core of it, I just wasn't good enough. That's why he left. And what I had to realize was that there's a lot of other scenarios. And I would say a lot of the other adversities I've been through, plus hearing other people's adversities and just observing life in general,
Mhm.
that we do create these stories to try to help ourselves cope with things. And it's not always the right story and it's not always the best story. And so, what I've come to believe in this particular case about my biological dad, is that maybe I was good enough. And being a baby, how could I even say, being born in a hospital when he walked out, like there's no way that I wasn't good enough because I was a baby.
Mhm. Mhm.
But what I realized though is that maybe him walking out was actually the best decision of my life.
Mhm.
And so I have the story over to the right for example, that I believed for so many years. And then there's the story on the left of maybe him walking out was the best. And I could create 1 million other stories in between. And for those of you listening, this has to do with you too, with any adversity that you face or that anyone faces. And what I did realize is that I really want it to be around positive intent. It goes back to your O of optimism. It
Yeah.
goes back into what we choose to believe. And so I choose to believe that him walking out was actually the best decision. That maybe there was something he would have known. Maybe he would not have been the best dad.
Mhm.
And I did read in his obituary that he spent his last days with his AA friends. So obviously there's some challenges in his life as well. And so maybe some of those would have come into play. But no, I think adversity can either make us or break us.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't ever welcome it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I understand that it's serving a purpose.
Yeah, and it goes back to, like you said, those stories that we tell ourselves. It's what goes on in our head. It's the narrative that we feed. They talk about feeding the positive or the negative, and we have a choice. We can feed one or the other, and if we choose to feed that negative and to wallow in that misery, that's exactly what we're going to get in our life. So
That's
as you
right.
we can create so many different stories around what this obstacle means. And I think we all find ourselves going down that road. I just went down that road this week. There was something that happened, there was an obstacle I faced. All of a sudden, the story that I was telling myself is that I wasn't good enough or that I wasn't, equipped to handle this obstacle. When matter of fact, I am. And I have to dispel those negative thoughts because that's kind of where it all starts. It's with our mindset. Whatever we're telling ourselves, that's kind of what comes out of this. That's the self fulfilling prophecy, right?
Yes. Yes.
Mhm.
Randy, do you mind me asking you what strategy you used to pull yourself out of that?
Well, this week, I'll be honest, I called a coach. I have an executive coach, and I called him and I said, okay, I know this isn't healthy. I know this isn't where I need to be. And so let me tell you what happened and let's process this. So we verbally processed this. And at the end of the phone conversation, I still wasn't feeling amazing, but I recognized my limiting beliefs. I recognized where I had went off of the tracks and I had started feeding a narrative that just wasn't accurate. It just wasn't based in reality. And then I was able to engage in the meaningful work that I needed to do. And before the end of the week, I reconnected with my why. I felt really good about the work that I was doing, and I completely changed course. Yeah.
Yay. Love
Yeah.
hearing that.
Yeah.
Good hearing
So,
that.
and there's a lot of different strategies, and I'm glad you asked that question because, for our listeners, that's just one strategy, and not everybody has a coach. Even though I do think having a coach is incredibly impactful. What are some other strategies that you work with your clients on?
So I think, first of all, the awareness that you had, like
Mhm.
you realized, and I feel like that's almost a first step, like realizing that, hold on, you are starting to spiral or ruminate or go down a
Mhm.
path that's not necessarily accurate. And so I think having those people that can be the sounding board is so important. One of the other things that I know, Dr. Daniel Amen, I remember hearing from him years ago that when you tell yourself, you create a story about something and you tell yourself. So, for example, let's say that somebody's doing a task and they're like, "I'm so stupid."
Mhm.
Say to them or yourself, say, "Is that 100% true?" Now, depending on where we are in the spectrum of emotion, we could be like, yes, it's 100% true because they're so
Mhm.
irritated, not in a good space. But then he said, ask yourself or them, is it 100% true? As in 100% all the time.
Mhm.
And at that point, we have to be honest with ourselves. Like, no, it's not. Like, I have been successful at this, or this has worked out at that time, or, I have said this before. And so now you have to start, what you're doing is you're shifting your brain. So our brain loves to get into that emotional, which is more of the middle area, which the hippocampus is, and the amygdala, and sometimes even shift further back into the brainstem. But when we are in that's like a survival mode, and I am definitely simplifying the brain here,
Mhm.
but when we're in survival mode at that point, we're not in logical mode, which is in the front where our prefrontal cortex is and where we can do our planning and decision making and judgments and all the good critical thinking and decision making that we want to do. And you cannot be essentially, again, simplifying in thinking mode and survival mode at the same time. The blood flow literally backs out of the frontal lobes and goes into more of the areas of survival. And so when we ask ourselves questions such as, is that true? We may still be heightened emotionally, but now we can start to shift to say, but is it 100% true? Which is forcing the blood flow back into the frontal lobes to get us to think like, is this actually really true? And for me to go, no, because last week I did do this and, I have accomplished this, this, and this. So that's not exactly true. And it just gets us to second guess ourselves. So
Mhm.
that's one of my favorites. I also like having a list of reminders.
Mhm.
Like these are the things that, like, especially if you start going down certain paths, if you can create lists of things where you've proven to yourself or it's evidence that
Mhm.
that is not true, that you can revert back to and say, see, that isn't totally true.
Yeah.
And so that, to me, those are some of those favorites. People having a list or even just thinking, is it 100% true?
Mhm. Yeah, and in the book that I'm writing, Lead with Hope, one of the other things that I talk about is that mind, body, spirit connection. And for me, overcoming adversity and leading with hope, part of that is the spiritual component. And so, what has also helped me is there are specific scriptures that really speak to me. And so, having those positive, and it could be scriptures, it could be affirmations, it could be just something that somebody said to you, just a positive quote somewhere, um, that also helps me to shift. All things work together for the good. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. Those kinds of things lift me sometimes out of a funk so that I can restart, if you will.
Yes. Oh, I love that you said quotes. That's what another
Yeah.
favorite. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
also love music because the
Oh,
music
yeah,
changes the state
for sure. Yes,
so
it
fast.
does.
It's
So
incredible.
fast. Yes. Yes.
I actually have playlists that one of them says motivational and one of them says shine because obviously ignite your shine, but shine a playlist. But the word shine has to be in the song to make it into the shine playlist. So I just know certain moods, things that'll
Yeah.
help.
I have a group of female superintendents that we have. It's called an Elevate cohort, and we have an Elevate playlist. So, shout out to Mary Vogt, who is a superintendent at Bement, and she created that playlist. And it is it's super inspirational for a couple of reasons. One, because it reminds me of my Elevate sisters, and then two, just because of the music that she picked. It's just amazing.
Ah, that's incredible.
Yeah.
I like the title too. Elevate's one of my most favorite words.
Yeah, for sure. So, LaVonna, tell us about something that you're doing right now, a passion project that you have going on.
Oh, thanks for asking
Mhm. Yeah.
that. Yeah, so I find like, passionate about a lot of things, but I'm really getting more passionate about women in leadership.
Mhm.
I've been hearing in certain industries how the number of women going into leadership is actually declining. So we're
Mhm.
moving backwards in this. And I recently partnered with Alabama ASCD in class, and that'll actually next week I'm putting on a Women in Leadership Summit in like collaboration with them. So I will come there. I will do the Ignite Your Shine keynote with all of these women, and then allies and advocates who also support this will be in the room. And we have Rotarians coming, we have Chamber of Commerce coming, We have actually a college softball team coming from a huge university. And so just a lot of fun things that are being embedded into that. But they'll do the Ignite Your Shine keynote. And then we're doing a panel where they'll get to hear from other women leaders and from different organizations. Like we have one from corporate, for example. And it's just an opportunity to realize one, that you're not alone in a lot of what we face, and two, that we are in this together. It is about elevating, it is about uplifting, it is about us coming together. We don't need to worry about being the crabs in the pot, pulling each other down because it's unnecessary. As a matter of fact, Shine teaches us how to be about and to support each other.
Mhm.
And then we'll also be ending the summit with the opportunity to bring in what are some of those challenges that you're facing, and how do we use the collective wisdom of those in the room to give you the solutions that you're looking for and the support that you need. And so we've been doing this multiple times now, and I love it. I just an opportunity for women to believe in themselves. I watch the way we hold ourselves at times, with hunched over and curving in instead of holding ourselves confident, and to not only how the behavior of what we look like, but even the confidence of how we interact in a room. And so being able to support each other with that and uplift is just, it's very dear to my heart right now, and a shift that we've definitely made towards.
Mhm. And women in leadership, I mean, it is an area that is near and dear to my heart as well. And as I said, with the Elevate cohort, I know so many wonderful female leaders who sometimes we minimize our ability to be strong leaders. We get in our head, just like we were talking about before.
Yes.
But I believe that women are amazing leaders just because of their level of emotional intelligence. We bring something different to the table, and that's not to take anything away from the men who
Right.
are also impactful leaders, but it's definitely something that I think needs more attention, and we need to continue to grow our female leaders in every industry and give them the tools that they need.
Yes. I'm glad you said that, the minimized part, because that's exactly what we've been taught as women, to not be in the forefront, to not speak up a lot of times, looking back in history and roles that women have played to where, we are now.
Mhm.
And I know for me, I still have a big voice in how I grew up with about being humble,
Yeah.
and humble to be quiet, to not be center stage, to not be, which is ironic now being a keynote speaker and working in what I do. But to me, it's not about that I'm not humble. What it's about is sharing a message. And if we can share our stories and support each other, that to me is where some of that magic also happens that we were talking about before, with having a coach or somebody to support you in songs and such. So I find that, us breaking through some of those barriers of what we've been told or taught. I just saw this week, I believe it was from, I don't, what was it, Harvard Business Review. I'm trying to remember. It was one of those well esteemed, like looking at statistics and such, but it's actually showing that women, saying that they're too emotional to lead.
Mhm.
The stories and like the stats, I should say, behind that is actually showing the opposite. That the fact that we can bring some of that emotion to the table actually allows us to be more human. And I can't remember all that it said, but it was just, I was like, okay,
Yeah.
here's some proof, evidence of
Mhm.
what us women often know, but not the verbiage that's necessarily out in the world.
Yeah. And we are running out of time, but I will tell you, I am going to have you back on the podcast just to talk about women in leadership, because I do think that this is such an important topic for us to continue talking about and bringing awareness to. Um, but as we wrap up today, LaVonna, can you let the listeners know how they can connect with you? Because I think your message is amazing. And I think that schools and organizations should contact you and bring you in to build that culture piece and to really help everyone see the greatness that they have within.
I would, first of all, love to be back. I just love our conversation. I do think it's extremely important that we talk more about this, and really just bring it to light and have some of those harder topics that aren't always easy. Because, like you said, I want to go back to, it's never about anything about men.
Mhm.
It's not about minimizing or going against a certain group. It's about how do we become more all inclusive altogether. And in some cases, making sure that we really uplift those that have not had opportunities in the past, for example.
Right.
So I would love to be back, first of all. And then, so igniteyourshine.com is my website. So feel free to check that out. And then I'm on all social media except X. So feel free to, it's LaVonna Roth. So LaVonna, and Roth is ROTH. So feel free to go there, or we're also at Ignite Your Shine. Unless you're on Instagram, it's at Ignite Your Shine now. So at Ignite Your Shine or LaVonna Roth pretty much sums it up.
LaVonna, when I do have you back, I do want to talk about some things that, we have the women in leadership topic, but I also think that there's a lot of things that women can learn from each other. For instance, as I was looking at your information on LinkedIn, I noticed that I think we're about the same age. And so as we navigate this thing we call life, there are some tips and tricks that we can share with each other. And so, on more of a side note, we may delve into that as well. But with that, I'm going to leave it here. Thank you for being on the podcast today. And I look forward to staying connected to you and having you back on the show to continue to talk about women in leadership.
Same to you, Brandy. Thank you.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at teachbetter.com/podcasts, and we'll see you at the next episode.